In the summer of 1940, London lived under fire. The Blitz was relentless. Sirens pierced the night, bombs whistled down from the sky, and the streets were lit not by lamps but by flames. Families huddled in shelters, entire neighborhoods disappeared overnight, and the city of London, proud, ancient, unbroken, stood on the edge of ruin. But history is not only written in speeches by prime ministers or in the maps of generals. It is also written in the quiet acts of courage that go unseen. It is written in the hands of nurses, in the endurance of mothers, in the small choices of ordinary people who refuse to give in to despair. This is the story of one of them, Margaret Ellis, a nurse, a wife, and a woman whose courage was not carved into statues, but into the fragile paper of a letter. Margaret was 26 years old when the war began. She worked at St. Thomas Hospital on the south bank of the Thames, where long corridors filled with the groans of the wounded, and the smell of antiseptic mixed with the smoke that drifted in from burning streets. She wore the plain blue uniform of a wartime nurse, crisp, practical, without adornment. But behind the uniform was a young woman who carried the weight of two wars, one in her hospital ward and one in her heart. Her husband, James Ellis, was among the thousands of men sent to France with the British Expeditionary Force. In the spring of 1940, as German forces surged across Europe, James was on foreign soil, far from home. Margaret did what she could in the only way she knew how. She wrote. Every night, no matter how exhausted she was, she sat down by candlelight and wrote James a letter. James, the bombs are heavy tonight. The windows rattle with every blast. But I keep working because someone must. There are too many wounded, too many frightened faces. I pray for your safety. And I pray this war ends before we are both too old to remember what peace feels like. For James, those letters were more than paper. They were a lifeline, carrying pieces of home across a sea that could not always be crossed by ships. Then came the night of September 7, 1940, the night the Blitz truly began. German bombers roared over London, dropping wave after wave of explosives. Fires consumed entire streets. Margaret's own neighborhood was hit. In a matter of minutes, her home, the small house she and James had rented when they married, was reduced to rubble. Walls crumbled, windows shattered, memories turned to ash. When the smoke cleared, neighbors searched the ruins. Furniture was gone, photographs lost. The rooms where laughter once echoed were now heaps of stone and twisted beams. But in the debris, someone found a scrap of paper, burned at the edges, smudged with soot, but still legible. It was one of Margaret's letters. That letter was carried to James. It reached him during one of the darkest moments of the war, the retreat at Dunkirk. James had seen men fall beside him. He had felt the hopelessness of being trapped on a beach with nowhere to run and nowhere to hide. The sea was choked with smoke and fire, and yet, against all odds, ships came. Little ships, great ships, anything that could float. Through it all, James kept Margaret's letter in his breast pocket. Folded, fragile, but indestructible in its meaning. For him, it was more than words. It was proof that he had something to fight for, something to live for. The war dragged on. James carried the letter across Europe, through long months of fighting. It remained with him when he was hungry, when he was cold, when he thought he might never see home again. And when he finally returned in 1945, he returned not just as a soldier, but as a man who had survived because of hope written on paper. Margaret was there waiting, not in parades or celebrations, but in the familiar halls of her hospital, still tending to patients, still writing letters, still standing in the ruins of a city that refused to be destroyed. Together they rebuilt their life. They never sought recognition. They did not tell their children about the letter for many years. To them, survival was enough. Love was enough. In the decades that followed, Margaret and James lived quietly. They raised 2 children, saw the city rebuilt, watched London rise from ashes into light. Margaret passed away in 1978. James followed a few years later. But the letter, the burned, fragile letter, did not vanish. Their granddaughter, Sarah, keeps it to this day. It rests in a frame. The ink faded, the edges fragile, but the words as powerful as the night they were written. That piece of paper isn't just family history. It's proof that love can survive even the darkest nights. My grandmother wasn't a soldier. She wasn't in the history books. But to us, she was the bravest person we knew. History often remembers the speeches, the battles, the names of leaders, but it forgets the small, quiet moments that held lives together. Margaret Ellis never commanded troops. She never stood on a battlefield. But she did something just as vital. She held on. She healed the wounded. She wrote words that kept a man alive in the darkest hours of war. Heroes are not always the ones we see in statues or parades. Sometimes they are the ones who write letters by candlelight, who keep working when the bombs fall, who remind others to take courage when the world seems to collapse. Margaret was one of those heroes, a forgotten hero of Dunkirk, not because she stood on the beach, but because her words crossed the sea and gave strength to a man who did. This was Timekeepers. History is not only about victories and defeats. It is about the people who endured, who loved, and who refused to let hope die. Margaret Ellis was one of them, and in remembering her, we keep alive the truth that sometimes the smallest voices echo the loudest through time. Join us again as we uncover the untold lives, the hidden courage, and the quiet strength of those who shaped our world.